Power can hold a city, it can shape markets, it can silence competitors, but it cannot bridge the space between a father and the children waiting for his love. 3 boys, bound by silence, were living in a mansion that felt like a museum of absence until someone dared to give them what their own father could not. That choice lit the fuse for a change that would alter everything he believed about success, family, and himself. If you're ready to follow this journey, remember to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments along with the place you're watching from. William Carter was a man who had everything the world could offer except the very thing that mattered most. As a white billionaire in Boston, he lived in a Beacon Hill mansion filled with marble floors, gleaming chandeliers, priceless art, and an emptiness that no amount of wealth could disguise. He had built Thomson Global, a technology empire that defined him, shaped him, and consumed him. Yet behind the heavy oak doors of his home, the silence was more than the absence of sound, it was the absence of connection. His identical triplet sons, Ethan, Daniel, and Matthew, were born deaf. They were 5 years old now, 3 little boys with blonde curls and piercing blue eyes, carrying the Carter name but lacking the father who should have been their anchor. William could barely look at them without remembering the loss of his wife, Emma, who had died giving birth. Her absence haunted him, and his solution was to bury himself in work. In his mind, providing financially was enough. His children had the best therapists, the finest doctors, the most expensive developmental programs money could buy. But he was never there. His world was filled with numbers and mergers, while his sons grew up with the gnawing ache of neglect. He was a man who could command boardrooms with his presence, but could not step into his son's playroom without feeling like an intruder. Each morning, he would rise at 5, dress in a tailored suit, and drink his coffee as he scrolled through quarterly reports. Each morning, he would walk down the long hall past a door decorated with colorful letters spelling out Ethan, Daniel, Matthew. He would pause, sometimes even let his hand hover above the doorknob, but then drop it and walk on. He convinced himself the children were fine without him. They had staff, schedules, specialists. They did not need him. At least that was the lie he told himself. What William could not see or refused to see was that someone else was filling the void he left behind. Her name was Angela Johnson. She was young, only 25, and black, with radiant brown skin, dark braided hair, and an energy that filled the cold mansion with life every time she walked into a room. She had not come from privilege. Raised in Atlanta, she had worked her way into Gallaudet University, where she studied deaf education, but when her mother fell ill, Angela left school to care for her, taking jobs to cover medical bills. Life brought her to Boston, where she found work as a housekeeper in the Carter household. But she was far more than the role she had been hired to fill. To 3 lonely little boys, Angela was laughter, comfort, and light. She was the first face they saw in the morning and the one who tucked them in at night. She was the one who wiped their tears when nightmares came and who danced with them in secret when the mansion was quiet. She was the one who believed in them when even their father could not find the strength to try. To Angela, these children were not projects to be fixed. They were souls to be cherished. And she did something William never thought to do. She listened, even in silence. Angela had been teaching the boys American Sign Language in secret for nearly 2 years. William had never asked what they did during the day, too consumed by his own life to notice the subtle movements of his son's hands when they played. Angela had carefully, lovingly introduced signs for eat, sleep, play, love. The boys had embraced it with eagerness. Ethan, the quiet thinker, would study Angela's expressions before signing back, deliberate and thoughtful. Daniel, the energetic one, signed in bursts, his small hands sometimes sloppy, but always full of excitement. Matthew, the observer, watched closely, and though he was the most reserved, his precision with signs was remarkable. The 3 boys thrived in a language their father did not even know existed under his own roof. One morning captured the essence of it all. William came into the kitchen, already on his phone, his briefcase in hand. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Angela said cheerfully. "Morning," he muttered without looking up. "I'll be late tonight." "Another board meeting?" Angela asked gently. "The boys were hoping you might read with them this evening." William didn't even look up from his watch. "I can't. The merger won't finalize itself. Make sure Ethan takes his vitamins. Daniel has therapy at 3, and Matthew," he stopped, shrugged. Just follow the schedule. Then he was gone, the front door slamming behind him. Angela exhaled slowly, then turned to the boys. Their wide eyes looked at her expectantly. She smiled. "Then we'll make our own magic," she signed. That morning, as she placed fruit and pancakes on plates decorated into smiling faces, she pulled out a small speaker. She set it on the table and turned it on. Vibrations pulsed through the wood, and the boys pressed their palms down, their eyes lighting up. They laughed, not the loud laughter William would have recognized, but the soft, breathy sounds of children who felt joy in their bones. Ethan, Daniel, and Matthew responded eagerly, their small hands forming shapes they had practiced hundreds of times, their faces brightening with pride. Angela had begun teaching them American Sign Language nearly 2 years earlier when they were only 3 years old, after noticing the frustration that built inside them each time they tried to communicate but could not. It started with simple signs, words like eat, play, love, and mother. And from there, it blossomed into a whole world of expression that had been hidden from them until she uncovered it. The boys embraced it quickly, soaking up the signs like sponges, eager to finally have a way to be understood, and Angela marveled at their intelligence. Ethan liked to watch carefully before repeating, always cautious and deliberate, while Daniel threw his hands around with more enthusiasm than accuracy, laughing at his mistakes, and Matthew sat quietly studying, then surprised everyone by repeating the sign with perfect form. Angela often thought about how tragic it was that William had no idea what his children were capable of, because he never paused long enough to see them. That day, she prepared breakfast with smiling faces of fruit and pancakes, and as the boys ate, she pulled out flashcards she had created herself, each with a picture on one side and the ASL sign drawn in simple lines on the other. The boys signed apple, banana, and orange, and Angela clapped for them, her pride bubbling over as Daniel exaggerated the sign for banana and made his brothers laugh so hard their shoulders shook. After breakfast, instead of the rigid schedule William insisted on, Angela gave them a choice, signing play or red. And when they signed play, she led them to the living room where she kept a box of toys designed for sensory experiences, toys that lit up and vibrated, toys she had purchased quietly with part of the household budget William never checked. The triplets squealed in delight as the toys lit up beneath their fingers, the vibrations telling stories their ears could not. Angela sat with them, guiding their hands, teaching them how to describe what they felt with signs. Ethan signed happy, Daniel signed fast, Matthew signed light, and all three smiled as if they had just unlocked a treasure chest. Later that afternoon, Angela drove them to their speech therapy appointment with Dr. Patricia Martinez, who greeted them warmly but frowned when she realized William was absent again. "He's missed the last 6 sessions," she told Angela, her voice heavy with disapproval. "The boys do better when parents are involved." Angela nodded quietly, not defending William but not condemning him either, because she knew the truth was self-evident. William did not come because William did not care enough, at least not yet, and that was something no one could fix for him. After therapy, Angela brought the boys back home and made a decision that defied William's carefully planned schedule. Instead of structured lessons dictated by specialists, she brought them into William's office, a place where they rarely ventured. The room smelled of leather and wood polish, with tall bookshelves and the massive mahogany desk at its center, a symbol of William's wealth and authority. Angela set down a small speaker, turned it on, and helped the boys climb onto the desk. "Are you ready for music time?" she signed. Their eyes widened with excitement as they nodded. She placed their hands on the desk as the vibrations pulsed through the wood, strong and rhythmic, and the boys giggled at the sensation. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the vibrations travel up his arms like waves. Daniel jumped up and down, trying to match the invisible beat. Matthew placed both palms flat, his expression serious, concentrating deeply as if he could hear the story the vibrations told. Angela climbed up onto the desk with them, taking their hands and guiding them into a dance, moving with the rhythm only they could feel. For a few precious minutes, the Carter office was transformed from a place of cold business into a stage where joy and connection reigned. Angela's laughter mingled with the boys' breathy giggles, and the room came alive in a way William had never allowed. What Angela did not know was that at that very moment, William was sitting in a sterile conference room across town, surrounded by anxious board members discussing timelines and shareholder concerns. He exuded confidence, speaking in calm tones, promising results, but in the back of his mind, for the first time in years, there was a flicker of doubt. Earlier that morning, as he walked past the boy's door, he had lingered longer than usual, hand on the knob, his chest tightening with something he could not name. He had walked away, as always, but the unease stayed with him, and while numbers filled the screens in front of him, he could not shake the image of the closed door. By evening, Angela had the boys bathed, dressed in pajamas, and tucked into bed. But instead of leaving, she sat with them, reading a story in sign language, her hands painting pictures in the air as they watched with wide eyes. Ethan leaned against her shoulder, Daniel tried to mimic the signs, and Matthew held his stuffed animal close, his eyes never leaving her fingers. Angela kissed each boy on the forehead, whispered goodnight, and stepped quietly into the hallway, not knowing that down the hall William had arrived home late, tired, and carrying the weight of the merger on his shoulders. He passed the boys' room as he always did, but this time he stopped when he heard a faint sound, an echo of laughter that seemed to linger in the air. He opened the door just a crack and saw his sons asleep, peaceful, with smiles still on their faces. For a moment, his heart ached with a pang he did not understand. Then he closed the door and walked away, telling himself tomorrow would be like every other day. He did not yet know that tomorrow would be the day everything began to change. After their session at speech therapy, Angela decided to ignore the rigid schedule William had left and instead gave the boys a choice, signing to them if they wanted to play in their room or do something special in the office, and when their eyes lit up and they signed office, she knew exactly what they meant. She had been saving her secret music time for days when their father was certain to be gone, but she trusted the moment now, knowing that it was the one activity that made the boys come alive in a way that nothing else could. She retrieved a small speaker from her bag, set it on the polished Brazilian mahogany desk that William valued so much, and helped each boy climb onto the wide surface that usually held contracts and computers. When she switched the speaker on, the vibrations pulsed through the wood, and instantly the boy's eyes widened. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing deeply as if listening with his entire body. Daniel bounced up and down, arms flailing with joy. Matthew placed his palms flat, his face intense and focused, trying to interpret every pulse. Angela climbed onto the desk with them, holding their hands, moving them in rhythm, teaching them to translate vibration into motion. The boys laughed, a soft, breathy sound that rarely came but filled the office with something priceless. And Angela felt a pang of pride mixed with sorrow, wishing their father could witness it but knowing he would never allow it. But fate, as it often does, intervened. William's afternoon board meeting was abruptly canceled, and he returned home hours earlier than anyone expected. He walked through the long hallway, briefcase in hand, distracted by the constant buzz of his phone until he reached his office door. When he pushed it open, the sight that met him froze him in place. There, on his treasured desk, were his 3 sons dancing with the black nanny he paid to clean his house, their faces radiant with joy, their hands moving in strange but synchronized motions. For a moment, William was too stunned to react, but then his voice erupted like thunder. "What is going on here?" he shouted, his words sharp and booming through the room. The triplets froze instantly, laughter cut short, eyes wide with confusion, and though they could not hear his words, they could read his expression of rage. Ethan clutched his chest in fear, Daniel shrank back, and Matthew's hands dropped from the desk. Angela, however, did not flinch. She looked directly at William, her eyes steady, and signed to the boys, telling them it was all right, guiding them calmly off the desk. "That desk is Brazilian mahogany," William barked, his anger rising. "Do you have any idea what it costs? You let them climb on it like it's a playground?" Angela's hands moved swiftly as she ignored his fury, continuing to sign to the children. They signed back, their faces alive with expression, their little fingers forming words William could not comprehend. His anger faltered, confusion creeping in, and his voice lowered to a whisper as he asked, "What are they doing? What is this?" Angela finally turned to him, holding Ethan's hand in hers, and said firmly, "It's called American Sign Language. It's how your sons communicate when you're not watching." The words hit him like a blow. He stared at his children, 3 small reflections of himself, suddenly animated and expressive in a way he had never seen before. Ethan signed something and looked to Angela, who translated softly, He said he likes the music because he can feel it. Daniel signed quickly, and she added, he said it makes him laugh. Matthew signed more slowly, and she interpreted, he said it makes him feel alive. William's throat tightened. He had never heard his children say anything like that, not even through speech therapy, not in all the years of expensive specialists and carefully controlled routines. Since when? He demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Since they were 3, Angela replied. I learned ASL from my cousin in Atlanta. Your sons are extremely smart, Mr. Carter. They have a lot to say. If only someone would listen. Her words landed like stones in his chest. He looked at the boys, their eyes bright, their hands moving rapidly in a language that belonged to them but not to him. He realized with cold clarity that Angela, the black woman he had hired as domestic help, knew his children better than he did, understood them in ways he had never bothered to learn. A sharp ache settled in his chest, part shame, part fear, part grief for the years lost. Angela guided the boys out of the office, her hand signing reassurances as they followed her trustingly, leaving William standing alone in the doorway. The silence that returned after they left was heavier than before, pressing down on him with unbearable weight. He moved slowly into the room, set his briefcase aside, and placed his hands on the desk where his sons had danced. He could still feel the faint vibration in the polished wood, could almost see their small feet stomping, their hands flying, their faces glowing. His sons, the children he had thought of as distant, unreachable strangers, had been laughing right here, speaking in a language he did not know existed in his own house. For the first time in years, William Carter, billionaire, felt powerless. At the office, his longtime partner Robert noticed it immediately. You seem distracted, Robert remarked, sliding a stack of merger documents across the conference table. William nodded quickly, pretending to be engrossed, but the numbers blurred on the page. Robert pressed further, his tone softening. If something's wrong, you can tell me. William's throat tightened, but he shook his head, insisting it was just fatigue. He could not bring himself to confess that the mighty William Carter, billionaire and corporate titan, had been undone not by competitors or investors, but by the sight of his own son signing words he could not decipher. The shame weighed heavily on him all day, and by the time he returned home, the exhaustion in his chest was far greater than the exhaustion in his body. That evening, as he trudged through the quiet halls, something unusual caught his eye near his office door, a piece of paper lying on the floor as if someone had slid it underneath. He bent down and picked it up, surprised by the colorful crayon marks that covered it. 3 small stick figures stood together on one side of the page, each with blonde curls and blue eyes, each clearly meant to be Ethan, Daniel, and Matthew. On the opposite side, far removed from them, stood a taller stick figure, alone, surrounded by rectangles drawn like computer screens. The little figures wore sad faces, while the tall figure appeared distant, unreachable, encased in his glowing machines. At the bottom, in shaky letters, one name was scrawled, Ethan. William felt the air leave his lungs as though someone had punched him in the chest. He stared at the drawing for a long time, every line cutting into him deeper than any report or news headline ever could. His son, his own flesh and blood, saw him not as a father, but as a stranger behind a wall of screens. The next morning, he lingered in the kitchen doorway, unseen, watching Angela prepare breakfast with the boys. She signed to them easily, her hands moving with confidence, her face full of warmth, and the boys responded with equal excitement, their hands flying, their smiles wide. He noticed the way they leaned toward her, the way their eyes sought her approval, the way they seemed to breathe easier in her presence. It was Angela who knew them, Angela who loved them, Angela who had given them the language to express their world. He, meanwhile, was the tall figure in the drawing, separate, unreachable. His chest tightened painfully, and before the boys could notice him, he stepped back into the shadows. At work, he could not concentrate. He opened his laptop, tried to read merger updates, but instead found himself opening a new browser tab and typing American Sign Language Basics. He clicked through beginner guides, staring at diagrams of hands forming letters, struggling to imitate them at his desk. His fingers felt stiff, uncooperative, almost mocking him for his years of neglect. The letter F eluded him again and again until he closed his hand in frustration. He who could negotiate billion-dollar deals could not even form a simple letter for his children. The irony was unbearable. That night, however, when he arrived home, he lingered again at the office door and heard faint sounds, soft guitar strings being strummed. He peeked inside and saw Angela sitting on the floor with the triplets, a guitar resting on her lap. She guided the boys' small hands to touch the wood as it vibrated, teaching them how music could be felt even if not heard. "Feel that," she signed, and the boys nodded, their eyes glowing. William stood frozen in the doorway, watching, something breaking open inside him. He did not interrupt, but later, when he sat alone in his bedroom, he knew the image would never leave him. The following day, he surprised even himself by telling the cook to set an extra place at dinner. That evening, he appeared in the dining room, announcing quietly that he wanted to eat with his sons. The boys looked startled, unsure what to make of it, and glanced immediately to Angela. She signed to them that their father wanted to join, and they nodded, uncertain but curious. William sat at the head of the table, the silence unbearable. He forced a smile and asked how speech therapy had gone, only to realize they could not understand him without Angela's help. She translated, and Ethan signed back shyly, "Good." Learned a new sound. William felt a flicker of hope, but when Daniel spilled his milk and William snapped sharply about the carpet being silk, the hope evaporated. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, and all three boys slipped silently from the room, leaving him alone with his shame once again. Later that night, when he returned to his office, the drawing still lay on his desk. He traced the sad faces of his sons with his fingertip, the rectangles of the screen surrounding the tall figure. He whispered into the empty room, "I don't want to be this man anymore," though no one was there to hear it. He knew then that something had to change, that the distance he had built to protect himself had become a prison for his children. For the first time in 5 years, William Carter allowed himself to admit that money and schedules and specialists could not raise his sons for him. They needed a father, and he was failing. Angela was at the counter preparing breakfast, her hands busy slicing fruit into neat shapes that she would arrange on the boys' plates into smiling patterns. The triplets sat at the table, still in their pajamas, watching her hands move as she signed to them, each child responding eagerly with small fingers forming words that William still could not fully comprehend. He stood silently in the doorway for a moment before stepping forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We need to talk," he said. Angela straightened, her expression wary, but she nodded, sending the boys to wash their hands. When they had left, she faced him directly, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" William pulled the folded drawing from his pocket, laying it on the counter between them. "My son made this," he said, his voice low. "Do you know what it means?" Angela looked down at the picture, her eyes softening as she recognized Ethan's shaky handwriting. "It means he feels distant from you," she said simply. "Because you are," William bristled, his jaw tightening. "Don't you dare lecture me about my role as a father. You've been teaching them sign language without my permission. You've been making decisions about their education that aren't yours to make." His tone was sharp, but Angela did not back down. Instead, she took a steadying breath and met his eyes. "With all due respect, sir, your sons needed a way to communicate. They were isolated, frustrated, and lonely. I gave them a voice. That's not overstepping. That's caring for them in ways you refuse to." Her words pierced through him, but his pride rose like a shield. "I've hired the best specialists money can buy," he snapped. "They have a treatment plan, a program designed to help them succeed." Angela shook her head, her braids swaying slightly as she spoke. "A plan to fix something that isn't broken. Your sons aren't broken, Mr. Carter. They're deaf. There's a difference." The kitchen filled with tension, the kind that hummed in the air and made the silence unbearable. William wanted to yell, to assert his authority, but Ethan's drawing pressed against his chest like a weight he couldn't ignore, reminding him that his son saw him as distant because he had been. His voice cracked when he finally said, "I don't know how to communicate with them. I don't know what to do." Angela's features softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "You could learn," she said. "It's not too late." Before William could respond, his phone buzzed loudly in his pocket, a calendar notification flashing across the screen. Triplets kindergarten evaluation, 9:00 a.m., Massachusetts School for the Deaf. He stared at the words, his stomach clenching with guilt. In the past, he had always sent an assistant to these evaluations, never once showing up himself. But with Ethan's drawing still on the counter and Angela's words ringing in his ears, he realized he had a choice to make: continue being the distant figure his son had drawn, or finally step into their world. "I need to reschedule my morning meetings," he muttered, dialing his assistant before Angela could say a word. When his assistant answered, William's voice was firm. "Clear my schedule until noon. I'll be attending my son's evaluation today." He ended the call and glanced at Angela, who watched him with raised eyebrows, surprise flickering across her face before it softened into something that looked almost like relief. "I'll tell the boys," she said quietly. "They'll be excited." Less than an hour later, William walked into the Massachusetts School for the Deaf lobby with Angela at his side and his triplets clustered close to her. The bright lobby buzzed with children and teachers signing energetically, their hands moving in a language that seemed foreign yet full of life. "Doctor." Patricia Martinez looked up from her clipboard, shock flashing across her face. "Mr. Carter," she said. "This is quite a surprise. I thought it was time I attended one of these evaluations myself," he replied stiffly, though inside he felt out of place, nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. Angela guided the boys to a play area with a young teacher while William and Dr. Martinez sat down. "In 2 years, this is the first evaluation you've attended," she said pointedly. William shifted uncomfortably, unable to deny it. "I know, I should have come sooner." The evaluation took place in a colorful classroom filled with posters, toys, and books. William sat in a chair far too small for him, watching as Miss Wilson, the teacher, sat cross-legged on the floor with the boys, signing fluidly as she engaged them. Ethan told a story through signs about a drawing he had made, his small hands painting pictures in the air. Daniel bounced with excitement as he signed numbers while jumping, showing how high he could go. Matthew carefully arranged blocks into patterns, signing questions about colors and shapes. William's jaw dropped slightly. He had never seen his son so alive, so confident, so fully themselves. "They seem so," he began, struggling for the right word. "Happy," Angela whispered beside him. "Confident." William nodded slowly. "Both." An interpreter approached, explaining that Miss Wilson wanted to know if he had any questions. William froze, realizing he didn't even know what to ask. "Tell her they seem to be doing well," he said at last. The interpreter signed his words, and Miss Wilson smiled, responding with compliments about each child's strengths. William felt a swell of pride, mixed with shame that he was hearing about these strengths for the first time. Martha Carter, William's mother-in-law, carried herself with the air of authority that had once dominated family gatherings. Her gray hair was styled immaculately, her pearls gleamed, and her lips curled into a thin line as her eyes swept the room. "I see you must be the housekeeper," she said coldly to Angela, handing over her luggage without waiting for a reply. "Put these in the blue guest room. The green gets too much sun in the morning." Angela hesitated, her pride stung by the casual dismissal, but before she could respond, William entered, surprised to see her. "Martha," he said, his tone more restrained than warm. "You didn't tell me you were coming." She raised her chin. "You haven't been answering my calls. I needed to see for myself what is happening with my grandsons." Her gaze flicked to Angela, her disapproval clear. "And I see the help has been given far too much influence." At breakfast, the boys signed eagerly to Angela about their evaluation the day before, their little hands moving quickly. William attempted to join in with clumsy signs, earning shy smiles from Ethan and Daniel, but Martha frowned, setting her teacup down with a sharp clink. "What is this nonsense?" she demanded. "Why are they waving their hands like that?" "William, I thought we agreed the boys would learn to lip read and speak like normal children." William stiffened, but before he could reply, Angela said firmly, "It isn't nonsense, Mrs. Carter. It's American Sign Language. It's how your grandsons communicate." Martha's eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Sign language will isolate them. They'll never succeed in the real world if they rely on this crutch." Emma wanted them to speak, not hide behind hand gestures. "And you," she turned her glare on Angela, "you are just a housekeeper. It isn't your place to decide what's best for these boys." Angela's back straightened, her jaw tightening, but she kept her voice even. "With respect, I'm not deciding anything. I'm giving them the tools to express themselves. They are thriving with sign language. They laugh, they share, they tell stories. That isn't hiding, it's living. The boys watched nervously, sensing the hostility even if they couldn't hear the words. Ethan clutched Matthew's hand, Daniel fidgeted with his fork, their bright morning darkening under the weight of adult conflict. William finally spoke, his voice controlled but firm. "Martha, enough. I've seen what sign language gives them. They are happier, more confident. You don't know what I saw at that school yesterday." Martha's eyes filled with tears of anger and disappointment. "I know what Emma wanted for her children. She wanted them to sing, to play music, to be normal. You're betraying her memory by letting this woman," she pointed at Angela, "fill their heads with ideas that will hold them back." The word betrayal stung deeply, for William still carried guilt about how little he had done since Emma's death. But Ethan's drawing weighed heavier. He could no longer deny that his absence had already betrayed his sons far more than sign language ever could. The day grew more tense as Martha followed Angela and the boys around the house, critiquing every choice. She scoffed at the sensory toys Angela provided, dismissing them as indulgences. She frowned at the colorful fruit faces on their plates, calling them childish. She even interrupted a signing game, snapping her fingers sharply as if to force the boys to focus on her lips. When they failed to respond, she muttered under her breath, "Hopeless." That night, when the children were asleep, William confronted her in his study. "You can't undermine Angela in front of the boys. They trust her." Martha shot back, "They trust her more than their own father. Can't you see how dangerous that is? She is dividing them from you." William's voice hardened. "No, Martha. She's showing me the truth. They were already divided from me because I chose work over them. Angela gave them a language. She gave them a chance to connect. You may not like it, but I will not take it away from them." Martha's eyes glistened, but her tone remained sharp. Emma would have hated this. She wanted music in their lives. William's hand trembled slightly as he lifted the crayon drawing from his desk and showed it to her. "This is what my son sees when he looks at me. Do you want me to keep living like this, separated by silence, or do you want me to step into their world? Because that's what I'm trying to do." For the first time, Martha faltered, her mouth opening, then closing, as though she had no ready reply. She turned and left the room without another word, her heels striking the floor like gavel blows. William sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He had stood his ground, but the conflict had left him raw, shaken by the realization that the battle was not only with Martha, but also with his own fears of failing Emma's memory. He wanted to honor his late wife, but more than that, he wanted to be the father his children needed, not the stranger they drew in crayon. He sat there for hours, staring at the drawing, whispering to himself that he would not let prejudice, whether from Martha or from his own past blindness, dictate his son's future. He practiced signs at night in the study until his fingers cramped. He stumbled through simple greetings in the mornings, and though the boys often laughed at his mistakes, it was laughter filled with warmth. Not cruelty, a sound that told him he was slowly being invited into their world. Still, the tension between honoring Emma's memory and embracing the reality of his children's lives gnawed at him, and that tension reached a breaking point at the annual Thompson Technologies Company picnic held at Boston Common, an event that had always showcased William as the polished CEO, but that this year would test him as a father. The park was buzzing with activity as employees and their families gathered under large white tents, children running through fields of green while vendors handed out ice cream and balloons. And for once, William arrived, not alone in his suit, but with Angela and the triplets by his side, his sons clinging nervously to him in a public setting they did not fully understand. He felt eyes on them immediately, some curious, some judgmental, as he knelt to their level and signed clumsily, asking if they wanted ice cream. Ethan and Matthew smiled shyly, signing yes, while Daniel, full of restless energy, bounced up and down, already distracted by the bright sights around him. William guided them toward the stand, his heart thudding with the awkward self-consciousness of a man unused to showing vulnerability in front of his employees. As he signed again, asking which flavor they wanted, he heard a woman nearby whisper to a friend, "Why is he moving his hands like that?" It looked so strange. The words stung, but William kept his composure, signing more deliberately, reminding himself that his son's comfort mattered more than a stranger's ignorance. In the commotion of ordering and handing out cones, William failed to notice Daniel chasing a colorful butterfly that fluttered past the stand, his small feet carrying him quickly across the field while his father's back was turned. By the time William realized, Daniel was gone. Panic surged through him, cold and choking, as he dropped the cones and scanned the crowded park. "Daniel!" he shouted instinctively, his voice sharp and desperate, but then the terror struck him harder. His son could not hear him. His knees went weak as he realized the futility of his cries. He grabbed Angela's arm, his eyes wide with fear. "He's gone," he rasped. She immediately gathered Ethan and Matthew close, asking witnesses if they had seen a small blonde boy running, while William bolted through the crowd, showing Daniel's picture on his phone to anyone who would look, pleading for answers. The minutes dragged like hours as he pushed through throngs of people, his mind racing with dreadful images of his son lost, vulnerable, unable to call for help, or even understand danger approaching. Park security joined the search, then police officers, their radios crackling with updates as they organized teams to cover different sections of the grounds. "Is he deaf?" one officer asked sharply, and when William nodded, the man's face darkened. "That makes it more urgent. He won't hear instructions or warnings." Each passing minute stretched William's panic tighter, his chest constricting until he could barely breathe. He thought of Ethan's drawing, the tall figure distant from his son's, and realized with horror that his absence had trained Daniel not to look for him in moments of need. For over 2 hours, William searched relentlessly, his expensive shoes caked with grass and mud, his suit jacket discarded somewhere behind him, his hands trembling as he asked strangers if they had seen a little boy with curls. Finally, after nearly 3 agonizing hours, a radio call came through. A park ranger had spotted a small boy sitting calmly on a bench near the duck pond half a mile away. William sprinted, lungs burning, until he reached the pond and saw Daniel sitting with his legs swinging, watching ducks swim serenely, completely unaware of the chaos his disappearance had caused. Relief crashed over William like a tidal wave as he dropped to his knees and pulled his son into his arms, holding him tightly, his hands shaking as he signed clumsily, "Daniel, scared, Dad scared." Daniel looked up in confusion, his small hands moving as he signed excitedly about the butterfly and the ducks, unaware of the tears streaming down his father's face. William held him longer than he ever had before, whispering into his hair even though he knew Daniel could not hear, "Never again, never again." That night back at the mansion, the boys were tucked safely into bed, but William could not rest. He sat beside Daniel's sleeping form, his heart still pounding from the terror of the day. Angela appeared in the doorway, her expression soft, but she said nothing, leaving him to his thoughts. As he sat in the dim light, Daniel stirred and opened his eyes. The boy signed slowly, haltingly, a phrase William did not fully understand. He looked helplessly at Angela, who stepped closer, her eyes glistening as she translated. "He's asking if you were scared today, and he says he's sorry he couldn't hear you calling his name. He wants to know if you're mad that his ears don't work." The words pierced William's heart more deeply than any accusation Martha had thrown at him. He shook his head fiercely, his fingers fumbling as he signed, "Not mad, never mad, love you." Scared because love. Daniel's face softened with a sleepy smile, and he nestled against his pillow, drifting back into slumber. William remained there for hours, replaying the moment, consumed by the realization that his son carried guilt for something that was not his fault. The thought that Daniel believed his deafness was a burden twisted William's chest with shame. He whispered into the night, "You are not broken, I am." And in that admission came clarity. The time for hesitation had ended. He could no longer afford to remain half in, half out of his son's world. He would learn, he would practice, he would stumble and fall, but he would never again allow his children to feel that their ears made them unworthy of love. In the days that followed, he cleared out the grand library in the east wing of the mansion, a room once lined with antique bookshelves and heavy mahogany furniture that had belonged to Emma's family, a shrine to tradition and wealth, and he replaced it with wall-to-wall mirrors, bright lighting, and open space, transforming it into a room dedicated entirely to practicing American Sign Language. He ordered flashcards, workbooks, and visual aids from every supplier he could find, and when the delivery trucks began to arrive, Angela raised her brows in surprise but said nothing, silently pleased to see him making such a dramatic commitment. The boys' eyes widened when they saw the space for the first time, mirrors reflecting their small forms back at them, and William knelt beside them, signing awkwardly, "Room, sign, practice." Together, their faces lit up, and they immediately began showing him signs they knew, laughing when he stumbled, patiently correcting his stiff fingers. For the first time, William felt not like a CEO trying to control a meeting, but like a student humbled before brilliant teachers who happened to be 5 years old. Ethan, with his patient nature, repeated signs slowly until William could follow, while Daniel, always energetic, insisted on racing him to see who could form letters faster, and Matthew carefully guided his father's hand when he made mistakes, his serious eyes filled with quiet pride at being the one to teach. At night, after the boys went to bed, William remained in the signing room, practicing until his hands ached, watching his reflection in the mirrors as he repeated the alphabet over and over, words like father, love, and safe etched into his memory through sheer repetition. Angela sometimes joined him, correcting his form, her voice soft but firm, and he began to realize that every lesson with her was not only about language but also about patience, humility, and listening in ways he had never practiced before. The more he learned, the more he saw how much he had missed, how many moments of laughter and storytelling had unfolded between Angela and his sons while he remained locked away in boardrooms, and the weight of those lost years pressed heavily on him, yet he used the guilt not to retreat but to push harder, promising himself never again to let his work steal away his chance at being a father. It was Angela who suggested he attend a weekend event at the local deaf community center, and though his first instinct was to decline, fearing embarrassment, he forced himself to agree. That Saturday, he walked into the crowded hall, stiff in his tailored suit, feeling the same anxiety he had once felt as a boy entering his first classroom. Families gathered in groups, their hands flying in animated conversations, the rhythm of signing filling the space with an energy unlike anything he had experienced. Angela guided the boys to join other children who welcomed them eagerly, while William stood awkwardly by the wall until a man about his age approached, smiling warmly as he signed and spoke, "First time?" William nodded, admitting quietly, "Is it that obvious?" The man laughed, introducing himself as David Wilkins, father to a young deaf daughter named Sophia, and for the next hour he spoke candidly about his own journey, about how he too had once resisted sign language, clinging to the hope that his daughter could somehow be made normal, and how he had nearly lost her emotionally before realizing that the only way forward was to step into her world rather than force her into his. The honesty struck William deeply, resonating with the same guilt he carried, but also with hope that change, while difficult, was still possible. When they left the event, the boys were bubbling with excitement, signing rapidly about the friends they had made and the games they had played, their joy undeniable. Angela caught William's eye as she translated some of their chatter, her expression both proud and challenging, as if to say, "This is what you've been missing." William nodded quietly, silently promising her and himself that he would not miss another moment. That night, when the boys were tucked into bed, he returned to the signing room and practiced until dawn, exhaustion finally pulling him into sleep only after he had repeated the sign for family 100 times, watching his own reflection until the meaning sank not only into his hands but into his heart. The transformation did not happen overnight, but in the weeks that followed, it became visible to everyone around him. At work, his assistant caught him fingerspelling at his desk during lunch breaks, and though she raised an eyebrow, she smiled when he explained simply, "My sons are deaf. I'm learning to talk to them." At home, the boys began leaving him drawings, not of a distant figure behind screens, but of a family together in the same space, stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun, their smiles wide. Even Martha, calling occasionally to check on the family, noticed the difference in William's voice, hearing a newfound steadiness, a refusal to back down when she pushed again for oral-only programs. "They're happy," he told her firmly. "That's all that matters." She huffed but fell silent, perhaps sensing that the William who once bent easily to her authority had been replaced by a man reshaped by love and responsibility. Angela too began to see the change, not only in his ability to sign, but in the way he moved through the house. No longer a ghost passing through hallways on his way to the office, but a presence who joined the boys at meals, knelt to their level, and listened with eyes as much as ears. Sometimes she caught him watching her, his gaze lingering with gratitude and something deeper, though neither of them spoke of it. Both focused on the boy's growth and the fragile but steady bonds knitting the family together. Robert Feldman, his longtime partner and friend, tried to shield him, but even he warned William that whispers were growing louder, investors nervous about a distracted CEO. William, however, could not return to the man he had been before. He had stood in mirrors with aching hands, watching his son's joy when he managed a clumsy sentence, and no stock price could compare to the look on Matthew's face when he signed father correctly for the first time. Yet business and family were now colliding at full speed, and the collision came to a head in a boardroom packed with executives, papers rustling, Carolyn standing with her presentation already queued up on the massive screen. She spoke crisply, her voice slicing through the air. Ladies and gentlemen, our company faces unprecedented opportunity, but also unprecedented risk. The merger is delicate, and leadership instability at this moment is unacceptable. In the past quarter, Mr. Carter's presence has diminished, his attention divided, and his recent pet project, a so-called accessibility initiative targeting niche markets, demonstrates a lack of focus on our core mission. The word pet project stabbed at William, but he kept his face impassive as Carolyn advanced slide after slide, showing graphs of his declining attendance and metrics skewed to highlight his absence. Murmurs spread through the board. Then she struck the blow he knew was coming. Therefore, I propose that the board limit Mr. Carter's authority on new projects and consider leadership transition if his focus cannot be fully restored to the merger. Robert stood quickly, pushing back his chair. That's premature and unfair. The merger is on track. We've had no delays. And the so-called pet project has attracted serious external interest. Letters from companies like Microsoft and Apple. He gestured toward William. If anything, he's identifying future growth. Carolyn's smile was tight, practiced. Letters of interest are not contracts. Investors want stability. They don't want personal distractions turned into corporate strategy. Every eye turned to William, who rose slowly, buttoning his jacket, his heart pounding not with fear, but with the memory of Daniel asking if he was mad that his ears didn't work, of Ethan's drawing showing him as a distant figure, of Matthew's patient hands correcting his clumsy signs. Those images gave him strength. He began evenly. 5 months ago, I was everything Carolyn says I was, a man obsessed with numbers, charts, mergers, and I was also a stranger to my own children. My triplet sons are deaf, and I convinced myself that if I threw enough specialists at the problem, they could be made normal. I ignored their world, and in the process, I nearly lost them. I cannot undo those years, but I can decide what kind of leader and father I will be now. He gestured to the screen where Carolyn's graphs glowed. Yes, I've missed meetings. Yes, I've rescheduled calls, but I have not abandoned this company. The merger remains on track. Thomson Technologies is strong, and what Carolyn calls a pet project, I call the future of this company. 20 million Americans live with hearing loss. Globally, hundreds of millions. And yet most technology companies pretend they do not exist. We build communication technology, phones, software, systems, yet we ignore the very people who need communication the most. That is not distraction. That is opportunity, both moral and financial. He clicked to his own slides, revealing letters of interest, market size charts, and prototype sketches he had refined with Marcus Chen and other deaf engineers. This is not about my personal life. This is about a market underserved, ignored, and waiting for leadership. If we do not step forward, someone else will, and they will take the loyalty of a community that values companies who listen. He let the words hang, scanning faces. Robert nodded subtly, but others looked uncertain. Carolyn leaned forward, pouncing. And what happens if your priorities conflict again, Mr. Carter? What if you must choose between attending a merger negotiation and a therapy session for your sons? Which comes first? The question was a trap, but William did not flinch. My sons come first, he said clearly. Gasps rippled through the board, some shocked, some impressed. He raised a hand before Carolyn could press further. And before you claim that makes me unfit, let me remind you why I built this company in the first place. Not for mergers, not for titles, not even for wealth. I built it because I believed in connection, in breaking down barriers between people. I lost sight of that vision chasing quarterly numbers, but my sons reminded me, connection is what matters. And that is why I will fight for this accessibility initiative, not as a distraction, but as an expansion that aligns with our original mission. For an hour, the debate raged. Board members split between Carolyn's call for focus and William's vision of inclusion. At last, the chairman called for a recess, the board leaving the room to deliberate. William sat heavily, his hands trembling, sweat dampening his collar. Robert leaned close. That was brave, but it could go either way. William nodded, whispering, I know. But I couldn't lie. In the hallway, waiting, he pulled out his phone and called Angela, needing to hear her voice. How are the boys? He asked. She smiled through the line. They're fine. They're using the new tablet you ordered. They're showing each other drawings. They're happy. He closed his eyes, picturing it, grounding himself. Whatever happens in here, he said, tell them their father is proud. When the board reconvened, the chairman spoke gravely. After consideration, we will allow Thompson Technologies to pursue both the merger and the accessibility initiative. However, to ensure stability, leadership of the new division will not rest with Mr. Carter. It will be directed by Ms. Winters, reporting directly to the board. Mr. Carter remains CEO, with his primary focus on the merger. Relief and disappointment collided inside William. He had saved his vision, but lost control of it. He extended his hand to Carolyn, who shook it with a thin smile. Make it successful, he said simply, and though her expression revealed little, he knew she would, if only to prove him wrong. The compromise at the boardroom had left William with mixed emotions, the sting of losing control over the accessibility division heavy on his pride, yet the relief of knowing the vision would live on stronger than the bitterness, because deep down he understood that power was not the ultimate goal anymore. Connection was. In the weeks that followed, his evenings were no longer consumed by merger contracts and investor calls, but by dinners at the long dining table where he sat across from his sons, fumbling through new signs, laughing at their corrections, and listening to their stories unfold through hands that moved with more life than his words ever carried. The library turned signing room had become the beating heart of the mansion, its mirrored walls reflecting not wealth but growth, its open space filled with laughter and practice, with Angela guiding lessons and the boys teaching their father as eagerly as they once avoided him. Even Gloria, who had once railed against sign language, began attending weekly classes at the community center, her stiff hands slowly learning the shapes of letters, her face softening as she knelt to her grandson's level and signed clumsily but sincerely. Love you. The mansion, once a cold fortress, was alive with a new rhythm, one not of silence but of belonging. As the triplets' 6th birthday approached, William stumbled upon a sealed envelope hidden in Emma's old desk drawer, addressed in her familiar handwriting. To my husband, to be opened when our children turn 6. His hands trembled as he broke the seal, tears burning as he read words written before their birth, before she knew they would be deaf, words filled with hope and trust. Whatever challenges they face, I know you will guide them with love, because your love is greater than your fear. He pressed the paper to his chest, sobbing quietly, realizing how much time he had wasted running from fear, but also realizing that he was finally honoring her faith. On the day of the birthday, he surprised his sons with more than gifts and cake. He surprised them with stories of their mother, told not in hushed fragments but in signs carefully practiced, his hands trembling as he described Emma's love for music, her laughter, her strength. The boys listened intently, their eyes wide, their small hands moving rapidly with questions, and for the first time, William answered each one with patience and honesty, his halting signs enough to bridge the gap that had once seemed insurmountable. She loved you before she knew you, he signed, and she would be proud of you just as I am. The boys hugged him fiercely, and in that moment, William felt the distance of 5 long years collapse into nothing. 2 weeks later, Thompson Technologies hosted its annual gala at a grand hotel in Boston, but this year, the event was unlike any before. William stood at the podium, speaking and signing simultaneously, his voice strong, but his hands stronger, his message clear. 3 years ago, I could not sign a single word. I saw deafness as limitation. Today, I see it as difference, as strength, as a way of experiencing the world that enriches us all. Technology must serve everyone, not just the majority. That is why accessibility is not a distraction, it is our future. Behind him, photographs flashed of the accessibility devices already rolling out visual alarm systems in hotels, apps translating speech to text in real time, educational tablets designed with input from deaf engineers. Carolyn, once his rival, had delivered results, and though she still eyed him with rivalry, she now nodded with respect, acknowledging that his vision had sparked something transformative. The audience applauded, investors intrigued, advocates moved, and among them were families from the deaf community who saw in William not just a CEO, but a father who had chosen to listen. The highlight of the night came when the triplets, dressed smartly, walked on stage and performed a signed song, their small hands moving in unison to projected images of nature behind them. The room was silent but electrified, every eye watching the beauty of expression that needed no sound. When they finished, the applause thundered, but William's focus was only on his sons, their faces radiant with pride. Angela stood to the side, tears glistening, her hands clasped over her heart. Later, as the gala ended, William found her and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, shaking her head. "You did it for them. I just gave you the key." Their eyes held for a long moment, unspoken understanding passing between them. In the months that followed, the accessibility division became the fastest growing arm of Thomson Technologies, hailed in the press not just for profitability, but for its social impact. Yet William measures success differently now. Success was Jacob leaving drawings of their family not divided by distance, but standing hand in hand. Success was Daniel asking questions about space after meeting a deaf NASA engineer, believing he could one day reach the stars. Success was Matthew teaching his grandmother how to sign "good night" without fear of being corrected. Success was the laughter echoing through the halls of a mansion once lifeless. He still worked, still wore tailored suits, still signed contracts and delivered speeches, but he no longer mistook those for the essence of life. Each morning he rose not for the boardroom, but for breakfast with his sons. Each evening he returned not to silence, but to conversation in hands that spoke more powerfully than words. Years later, when the triplets stood tall as young men, William would look back and know that the true merger was not Thompson and Miller, nor any corporate deal. The true merger was his own heart with his children's world, his willingness to leave behind fear and embrace difference, his courage to learn a new language of love. He had once been the distant father in Ethan's painful drawing, isolated behind screens, unreachable, but now he was part of every picture his sons sketched, every story they signed, every future they dreamed. In the end, the silence of their world had not broken him. It had saved him. It had forced him to listen with more than ears, to love with more than words, to live with more than ambition. It had given him back his family, and in doing so, it had given him back himself. The end. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about William's transformation and the choices he made for his sons? Did the ending feel powerful to you? Tell me in the comments what part of the story stayed with you most, and also share where you're watching from. It means a lot to know the places these stories reach.